In today's video, we're going to be looking at the ultimate evolution of our Houndmaster build from last week. This build focuses on the Hellhound as a pet, the Doombolt as a nuke, and the Flames of Ignifar as a crowd control damage ability. If you're not familiar with the previous video, I highly recommend checking that one out before this because that is more geared towards leveling the character. But now that we're in Ultimate, freshly starting out, we have tons of damage to clear out these hordes, and we're going to be chasing down a lot of monster shrines for gear drops and everything getting bigger and better as the game progresses. In this video, I'll be talking to you ultimately about the abilities, the devotions, and the gear that is making everything possible at this level. Currently we are 76, level 75 is a huge power spike for this build, and there are a couple monster infrequents inside as well, making things work just as smoothly as you'd want them to in a pet build. Now, it is a YouTube video. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe your heart out while the gameplay rolls in the background. You'll see plenty of lightning bolts, plenty of flames, lots of puppies, and what I consider to be the most efficient way to play the build as it stands right now. If you're looking for a top-down of what this build really does, it is a pet build that is going to have a lot of tank focus on our Hellhound. We are going to be guiding him a lot because he should be in defensive mode nice and close to us, as well as having a backup buddy in the Eldritch Hound from our devotion. Other than that, Doombolt is going to be doing a lot of AoE damage on a relatively small cooldown, and then we've got Flames of Ignifar to thin out really large crowds of enemies so that our Doombolt can finish them off, while our Hellhound takes up all of the aggro. You'll be seeing a lot of Sigil of Consumption as well, and this ability is more for keeping us healthy and doing some decent AoE damage in a big circle on a very low cooldown, but it is not going to be nearly as important as your Doombolt and your Flames. The other ability that you'll need a lot of use out of is going to be your Word of Renewal from the Inquisitor tree in order to keep yourself and your pet alive as much as possible. Couple that with Blood of Dreeg with just a few points and you can become incredibly tanky, and your pet can live almost indefinitely unless you want to send the Hellhound back home in a fiery explosion that destroys enemies around your pup. We're going to be talking about gear first in this video, since we've already talked about masteries in the last video and talked about what makes those so important. But gear is more important as Ultimate goes through, as the levels go up and the enemies get more difficult. 75 is a very big power spike for this build specifically, because that is when we're going to get access to the first set that we'll be using in this build, and it is only a 3-piece set. It is called the Harbinger. Harbinger comes with a mask, a crossbow, which is two-handed, and a set of gloves. Harbinger of Eternal Suffering is the bow, and that in and of itself should be providing a lot of damage. It also has its own passive, just like the other two items in the set, which will make it even better. The Harbinger's Mark is the passive for this crossbow, and what it will do is when you hit a critical attack on any of your abilities that will do so, you will drop a mark. That mark is going to reduce defensive ability, take off 10% physical resistance and 20% chaos resistance for the target that you hit for 6 full seconds. Based on what you're seeing on the screen right now, lots of enemies do not survive beyond the 3-second mark, if we're being honest, so this is an incredibly useful ability. This crossbow also comes with some skill cooldown reduction, which makes your Doombolt even lower cooldown, so we take it from a moderate cooldown, then add our gear in, and we can reduce it to a relatively low cooldown. Still has a little downtime in between, but the more nukes that we can drop, the better when it comes to this ability. Moving on to the Mask of the Harbinger, this passive is going to provide even more skill cooldown reduction at 10%, and it's going to drop off some offensive ability as well as defensive ability as a passive bonus. So there's nothing to activate, you put the mask on simply, and you're getting 10% CDR with a offensive and defensive boost. It's really, really nice. Couple that with the fact that that's a 2-set bonus there. We're getting a small amount of flat chaos damage, and then we're adding some buffed chaos damage on top of that. This set is going to be very, very, very good for a two-handed chaos dealing damage build, and that is what we are all about. And then the final piece of this set puzzle is going to be the Harbinger's Grasp. These are the gloves, and they come with a passive bonus as well that you do not have to activate. The gloves are going to give you flat chaos damage, buffed chaos damage, and defensive ability. They may be the least impactful of the three, it feels like, but once you have all three, you're getting yourself +3 to Soleil's Witchfire, which is the auto attack passive on your occultist, and you're getting 3 into Doombolt. And I don't need to tell you at this point, but Doombolt is really important to this build. Not only that, but when all 3 of these items are combined, you get the granted skill, the Harbinger. This activates when you drop below 50% health, and it's got a 40-second skill recharge while having an 8-second skill duration. Now, off the bat, you'll see 500% chaos damage is added to your kit, but that isn't the best part about this passive. You get a 100% chance to avoid melee attacks, a 100% chance to avoid projectiles, and then 100% sleep resistance, reduced stun duration, reduced freeze, reduced petrify, reduced entrapment duration. This ability is 100% ridiculously overpowered when it comes to living through certain death. Given that our resistances aren't up to the greatest tier in this playthrough just yet, we're still waiting for some augments, but that passive alone is worth its weight in gold, even though we don't end up falling below that mark very often. Basically, the damage that this build is doing right now is going to keep us nice and healthy as it is. Couple that with the Hellhound and its ability to target and tank a lot of frontline damage for us, things get pretty simple when it comes to staying alive. Now, other gear that is important, we're going to start with the single monster infrequent in this build, and that is going to be your Bloodsworn Sigil of Meditation. I'm not sure if the meditation is an affix. Either way, it's Bloodsworn Sigil. This is going to provide a change to Doombolt and Flames of Ignifer. It's also going to give you 3 points into Doombolt and 3 points into Endless Flame. Doombolt is going to get 250 flat fire damage, and it is going to convert 100% of the vitality damage into fire for the ability as well. It also changes it to that nice yellow color that is super apparent on the screen. I love it. The red bolt is cool, but I like the yellow one much better. On top of that, Flames of Ignifer is going to get a 4% of attack damage converted to health, and with the amount of spam that that ability has to get to clear out enemies, that is a very, very large amount of health that we can get back in a relatively small amount of time. As far as this build is concerned right now, putting on this monster infrequent changed the amount of damage the Doombolt was doing from 21,000 and shot it all the way up to 28,500. If we account for the crit damage coming in from this ability when it crits as well, we can get about 45 to 50,000 damage per Doombolt. And since it's an AoE and it hits pretty frequently, it is easy enough to see how those enemies just disappear. Now, honorable mentions for gear with this build. These are basically gear items that will likely not last, but at the moment they are irreplaceable because nothing better has taken their place. We've got the Vestments of Severed Faith for our chest piece, dropping 3 to Doombolt in there, as well as giving us a passive that is increasing our healing effects, giving us some Aether resistance, both of which are invaluable because we use a lot of healing in this build, and Aether res is on the lower side. Next, there's going to be the Fiend Flesh Mantle. That's giving us +3 to summon Hellhound, as well as some tanky stats and pet stats with damage, health, attack speed, Aether, and chaos resistance. The passive on this one too helps us stay alive if we're ever in trouble, because when we get hit, we get a big 20-second damage absorbing shield. After that, there is going to be our rings. This is a set of rings, and that's going to be the Hand of Mercy and the Fist of Vengeance. Open Hand of Mercy, Closed Fist of Vengeance. These guys provide some decent tanky stats, and together what happens is you'll get an increase in attack and casting speed, but the passive that comes about from it is a 5-second skill recharge, 10-second duration heal. So if you are paying attention to that last part of our build, the healing is pretty important, keeps us and our Hellhound alive very, very often, and if all we have to do is nuke some enemies out of existence to get some health back, I'm going to call it a win. Now let's move on to the devotions, because those have drastically changed since the last video. In the last video for leveling this build, I said that Dying God is going to be very important, and turns out it is not as viable as the game goes on. Dying God eats a lot of health when your character starts fighting, and our health bar is not as big as a tanky health bar like some other characters could be. So Dying God has been given the axe, and in its place we have chosen Korvac, the Eldritch Sun, and the Tree of Life. One thing I can say for certain about leveling this build is that you should definitely pick up every devotion shrine that you can early on, because wasting time in the later difficulties picking up extras is much more difficult than getting them on the first playthrough through normal. So hit every devotion you can, don't skip any of them, get yourself to the big tier devotions as fast as possible. Now that that lesson's been learned, let's talk about the devotions themselves. So the big ones, we've got Korvac, the Eldritch Sun, and Tree of Life. Those are both very good for pets. They have a lot of good pet stats. They'll be giving damage, offensive ability, health, and crit damage. All things considered, they are extremely strong. That also being said, Korvac comes with an incredibly good passive that you can equip to the Flames of Ignifar. You've probably seen it a couple times in the video, but it's the kind of spaghetti-looking meatballs that shoot out in a circle around us while we're channeling, and those have a chance to petrify, as well as reducing offensive and defensive ability on enemies that get hit by them. It is an incredibly, incredibly strong passive, and I would highly recommend it. The other passive, Healing Rain, coming from the Tree of Life, has a 25% chance to activate when hit, but it's going to restore health by 10%, and then it is going to increase health and energy regen as well. So all of that, very, very good for staying alive, and very, very good for keeping your pets alive, because the Tree of Life comes with health regen on top of health, and that's it. That's all health. Literally all the Tree of Life is. Now, the things that are going to get you up to that point, you're going to want to get your Sailor's Guide, Hound, Panther, Lotus, Eel, Lion, Jackal, Scholar's Light, Bismeal's Bonds, Solemn Watcher, and a single point into Ulo, the Keeper of the Waters. You'll actually see me pick up that final point in this video, and there is a good reason for that, because that only 1 point in Ulo, the Keeper of the Waters, gets us 10% elemental resistance, and our pets 10% elemental resistance as well. Right now, our pets don't have any, so that 10% is an infinitely larger amount. If you're keeping track, or if you're looking through the Grim tools, that is 9 devotions that have bonuses for us, but also bonuses for our pets. So since this is a pet-centric build, we're doing about 50-50, and we're going to be taking half of the damage through our Hellhound rather than through our character, who, all things considered, is pretty squishy. Pet builds are definitely difficult when it comes to making sure that they work in Ultimate, but this build I'm pretty confident in so far. So just remember, when you're using pets, their resistances do not drop when the difficulty goes up. Your resistances as a player do, but your pets are not penalized. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is the masteries. These abilities, the passives, the pets, all the points in these abilities are important to talk about because they have changed around a little bit from the last video. Our big important ones have remained, and that is going to be the Doombolt, Flames of Ignifar, Word of Renewal, and the Sigil of Consumption. So we've got the big ones all checking boxes there. But in terms of what points are going into what, remember that you want to have Doombolt maxed out as often as possible. If you're missing points in that, make sure to always have as many in there as you can, because that ability is going to be how enemies die. At least fast enough that it makes sense. Your next ability that you're going to want to have capped out is the Hellhound. Make sure all of your points go into the base skill for the Hellhound, because as it levels up, it gets more health and it gets bigger. Not only that, but it's getting, well, quite a bit of health, crit damage, and just regular damage. The Hellhound is a fantastic pet, and it is incredibly tanky when it comes to this build. As far as the passives that come along with the Hellhound, we're going to want to have as many points. Sorry, we're going to have more points in Ember Claw, because Ember Claw is going to generate threat for the Hellhound, which means that enemies are going to be more likely to attack it. After that, we're going to put a couple points into Hellfire, because we want the aura coming from the Hellhound as well, which is going to give us fire and chaos damage. That will ultimately get more points as we go later, past level 85, 90 or so. And then Infernal Breath is just the final ability for the Hellhound. This is going to reduce damage in an AoE from the breath of the Hellhound, and ultimately, once we get that up to about a 10% reduction in damage, there's not a whole lot of reason to continue on with it. So, in terms of importance, you're going to want Ember Claw with more points, Hellfire with the second amount, highest of points, and then Infernal Breath is going to be the last leg of points for the Hellhound tree. After that, you'll want to start putting a lot of points into Bonds of Bismael, because this is going to increase the health of your pets significantly, and it's going to give them energy regen to cast more abilities too. Bonds is incredibly important for having tanky pets when it comes to Ultimate, so make sure that you've got at least 7 points into Bonds. And then Manipulation, the modifier for it, you're going to want to toss a couple in there too, because that is increasing damage and speed for your Hellhound. After that, there is the Sigil of Consumption. Make sure that you've got more points into Destruction, which is the modifier, than you do the Sigil itself. Putting points into Sigil is good, but really all that's doing is increasing the amount of health that you're converting and the size of it. What we really want Destruction for is the added damage of fire and chaos. Those two damage types are big, but the Sigil itself only comes with Vitality and Vitality Decay, which aren't a huge issue for our build. There's also Soleil's Witchfire. This is going to be a passive that activates to attribute our chaos damage to our auto attacks. It's going to give us some attack speed as well. And if we take the Consecrated Blade modifier, all 3 points for this, it's going to convert physical damage to chaos, as well as give our pets chaos damage and a 45% physical to chaos damage conversion. So really important that we get this, because it's going to focus our Hellhound a bit more down the chaos and fire path. You'll also want to take Second Right on this ability. Not as many points as Soleil's Witchfire, the base ability, but it does give you vitality resistance as well as a buff to chaos damage. So it's still important, it's just less important because you only need so much vitality resistance when it comes around if your build is not already supporting a huge amount of it. Lastly, the passive that we have to talk about is Possession. Possession is the exclusive skill for the occultist. That's going to get you skill disruption, protection, chaos resistance, chaos damage, and about 16% damage absorption. It's always good for being tanky. Obviously, getting those resistances is really important. The skill disruption protection, though, is incredibly good when it comes to those ultimate enemies. Things get super hairy if you can get disrupted. We also have a few points in Blood of Dreeg, mainly because having another heal in this kit that already has a lot of focus on buffing heals is really good. So taking Word of Renewal and Blood of Dreeg is definitely smart. Now, Blood of Dreeg doesn't require a whole lot of points. I think if you can get 1 or 2 in there, and maybe 1 or 2 into Aspect of the Guardian, things are going to work out just fine. But Word of Renewal is much more important in terms of healing. So talking about Word of Renewal specifically, on the Inquisitor side of things, that's giving you almost 20% of the health bar back for yourself and your pets, and that is huge. It's also giving you a 10% less damage from Chthonians and Eldritch enemies, as well as a big chunk of defensive ability and movement speed. All that considered, your Hellhound is going to be very tanky with the Word of Renewal going, and since we're using a two-handed ranged weapon, we can take Word of Arms, which is going to reduce the cooldown and increase the energy regen of this ability significantly. Basically to the point that we'll be hitting the button anytime it's off cooldown, because having the heal and having the stats from it will be super important. The second mastery, Vigor, is going to increase the amount of flat health that this ability gives back, so it's definitely worth taking there. But more importantly, we've got about 5 points in it to reduce freeze, petrify, and entrapment duration while it's going. It's very, very strong for stopping CC, and since we're a little squishy ranged guy, that is important. And then finally, Steel Resolve is the last one. You don't need a whole lot of points in here. I took as many as I needed to get up to about 10% Aether and Chaos resistance while Word of Renewal is going on. That is plenty for me, and as long as that's active, we've got those increased bonuses. The increases in damage really aren't anything that we're worried about, so we don't have to worry about putting more than about 3 points into Steel Resolve. Now, in terms of the Flames of Ignifar tree, since this is one of our pinnacle abilities, you're going to want most of the points into Flames itself. Take about 7 or 8. Then we're going to take Tainted Flame. Tainted Flame is required because this is going to convert all of the fire damage into chaos and all of the lightning damage into vitality damage. So vitality, again, not a big deal, but having all that fire converted to chaos, which is our main form of damage in this build, is really important. We've also got a single point into Infernal Purge, but more are going to be going into this to increase the crit damage of the ability. And then Endless Flame is important because reducing the energy cost of this ability is going to let you channel it for longer, and it's also going to have a chance to fumble the attacks of enemies for 2 seconds. So that basically means that they won't be able to use their abilities for 2 seconds on a 16% chance. Things are very, 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 very positive for this build, and these masteries are the backbone of it. With all that being said, though, that's generally everything that you need to have this build working as well as it does in the video, and really that's all that I could ask for. It was a struggle to get up to this point to kind of flesh out what the build was doing, but now that we're in Ultimate, even with these reduced resistances, because we're still trying to find the right augments, get the right reputation to seal the deal, things are working incredibly well. Enemies are dying pretty fast. Monster shrines are still not at the point that they're killing us. They're actually not really doing much damage at all, if we're being honest. They're tanky, they're taking a longer time to kill, but not as long as would make me upset. Let me know what you think about this build in the comments down below. If you're a pet fan, obviously the Hellhound is one of the cooler ones in the game, and I would wholeheartedly recommend this build to making and maximizing that pet's potential. Or if you don't like it, if you have yourself a different Hellhound build, feel free to drop that down below. Don't forget, your Hellhound can be used as a nuke himself. If he gets too low in health, you can just resummon him. He'll explode, dealing a ton of damage and the puppy bomb just comes right back where you need him. But that is it for me, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out. I will catch you next time. Actually, while I'm on the subject of it, if you made it this far in the video, let me know through the comments, because I'm trying to keep track of this stuff a little bit better. But I have been thinking about doing something of a hardcore challenge in Grim Dawn. I've never actually made a hardcore character before, and I might go about documenting that through a YouTube series all the way up to level 100. If there's any interest for that, I definitely am already imagining what I'd like to do, but obviously interest drives the videos at this point, so that's what we're all about. Thanks so much for hanging out once again. I will see you guys next time. Peace out.